You're such a busy woman. You're chair of DEWA, the Deaf Ethnic Women's Association. You have no fewer than 4 university degrees. Rubbena Aurangzeb-Tariq. You've got 2 children to bring up, and on top of that you're a well-known, famous artist. How do you manage to fit it all in? What keeps you going?
I think what keeps me going is that I see so many barriers, so many challenges. You think, that's impossible. No, I can turn it round and make it work. If it doesn't work, I'll learn a different way, and then I'll make it work. I think that's how I've achieved things.
You're not only an artist, you're also an art psychotherapist, using art to help people understand their emotions. For those of us who don't really understand what art psychotherapy is, can you explain?
After I took my art degree, I didn't have any work. I wanted another challenge, so I decided to work in a mental health hospital. Then I saw something about art therapy, and I was intrigued. I was actually told about it by somebody deaf, so I went to see what they did, and I thought they were great role models. The art therapist's aim is to use art to express communication, not through language, but visually. The process of making something and translating what it means taps real emotional depth. I thought, that's perfect. That's what made me go for it, because there were no other deaf people qualified, and I thought I should do that job. That was my aim.
You said an art psychotherapist explores someone's emotions through their art. Can you explain that a little bit more? How does it work?
If a person comes for therapy and sits down, they have a lot of art materials in front of them. Not cheap, but good quality materials, so they feel valued, because their life experiences may have been traumatic. They may have experienced loss, or they're depressed, grieving after a death, so many reasons. They come along and they're not sure what to do, but through using the materials they find a way to communicate what they're feeling. Sometimes people feel angry. They'll use a lot of black and they'll really attack the paper with slashing horizontal lines. Then they may start using red with more circular motion. You can see the emotions coming out through what they're making, and I can analyze this process. Then when they calm down, you see a difference. They might use light blue with gentler swishing movements. When they say they're finished, then you ask them how they feel, and often they say they'll feel better. You ask them what they were thinking about, and they may tell you that they were thinking about this or that, or something terrible that's happened in their lives. That's why they've made it. There's a story there on paper. That's the evidence. When you try and talk about your emotions, you can lose track. But with art, the evidence is there. The story's there. You don't delete it, it's there. Some patients can't cope and they rip their art to pieces. But the rule is, whatever they do in this room stays there. The art will stay there and will look after it for 3-5 years or until the therapy's finished. If they then want it back, it's given back to them. But it's about making sure they have a safe space to express themselves.
As a therapist, do you work with deaf people?
Yeah, when I started working, it was mostly Asian hearing people who were the bulk of my referrals. Then, as manager of services, I started to work with deaf patients more and more. That gave them more wealth of opportunity because with a deaf therapist, there was no interpreter. There was a direct communication and understanding of their behaviour, language, culture, disability. It was a deaf person who knew, so they felt they were talking to an equal. They didn't feel inferior like with a hearing therapist. They feel equal, and that helps me make the breakthrough.
You work with deaf and hearing people. Are there differences?
Oh yes, deaf and hearing are very, very different because with hearing people there's an interpreter. There's a third person in the room, so the client has to cope with that extra person. But what's interesting is that most of my hearing clients feel good because I'm disabled. I'm not equal to them. They feel a bit superior because they're hearing and my disability makes them feel better. They can work through the therapy feeling more positive because they feel they're not really talking to a therapist. The eye contact's not there because I'm looking at the interpreter. They feel safe with that. With deaf people, it can be more painful for them because of the eye contact. The communication's direct. You know exactly what they're saying. So the process is more difficult and challenging. It takes longer to gain their trust because the deaf community is very small. They have to feel they can trust their therapist, so it's a challenge for them as well.
Do you think your passion for therapy comes from things that happened in your own upbringing? Now you want to help others. Because of your own experiences, do you wish this had been available to you?
Looking back on my life, it was quite lonely really, because my deaf school was a long way away and I had no deaf friends locally. I only had my mother and father and brother and sisters to be with. Growing up, I could see that my parents were really strict, but they allowed me to challenge difficulties I came across. They were concerned that because I'm Asian and a girl, I shouldn't be going out, but I told them I wanted to go and explore the world. They were taken aback and couldn't understand why. They were worried because I was deaf, but I told them if I stayed in all the time, I'd go crazy. I couldn't cope. I needed to go out. So they reluctantly let me go. There were some rules, of course, I gradually broke over the years. And from that experience, when I moved to London, I was shocked to see how Asian women suffered because they couldn't achieve their full potential in life. Why not? Why do their parents not encourage them? What's wrong with them? I couldn't understand it because my parents arrived in England in the 1960s with no English, not much education, but they owned a shop and they worked 7 days a week. My mum had to learn English because she had a deaf daughter and she had to help me communicate and improve my language. At that time, sign language was banned in schools, so I grew up oral. My parents followed the rules they were told would improve my life and did whatever they were asked. I couldn't understand why others weren't doing the same. There were people living on benefits, happy or depressed, broken marriages, domestic violence, all this. People lost their families. I couldn't understand it. I was shocked. How could this happen? That's why I felt I had to give something back, to make them see what's possible, be a positive role model. Look at me, I'm a therapist, I'm an artist, whatever. My father had to go back to Pakistan regularly to visit his parents, look after them. My mother had to run the business with my uncle, and on top of that she had to learn English as well, which was another reason for her to learn. She had 2 reasons, for the business as well. She worked 7 days a week, so I was really at home on my own, cooking, cleaning, that sort of thing. So I saw my mother working and I never thought anything different. I always expected to work when I grew up. No difference.
So you saw your mother work and followed her example, but why did you become an artist?
Why did I become an artist? That was a big accident. Because what happened, when I was at school, I was diagnosed as deaf at the age of 7.5. I'd been born deaf but not diagnosed. At that time there wasn't any compulsory hearing test. They thought I was lazy or had brain damage. So when they did the test and discovered I had 75% hearing loss in both ears, my parents were really shocked. They thought deaf people couldn't do anything. They would try any treatment that might make me hearing. They tried everything, went everywhere. My father especially was very upset. He blamed himself. He thought perhaps it was God's punishment because that's their culture. They do think that. So they tried everything to repair the damage. So what happened? My father tried everything to make amends because he thought it was his fault. Whatever I asked for, he gave me. So what happened with art was, at school I was very good at drawing exact copies of things. The teachers told my parents I was really good at drawing. They said I could sew very well too. So I had to make clothes and draw because they were the things I was good at, using my hands. It's the deaf way, so it had to be art. I wasn't very good at English and maths, so my parents accepted what the teacher had said about art. So I moved on to A-level art and carried on. The teacher said I should sketch a lot more at home, so again my mother said OK and went out and bought some materials. They thought art was the only thing deaf people could do because that's what she was informed, and there weren't any deaf role models. She couldn't imagine anything different. She was always checking with the teacher or anyone that was working with me how I was getting on. Was I doing well or not? And of course, she was learning English herself. If she thought what I had wasn't good enough, she'd think of ways to make it better. She gave me anything I needed. She was never on benefits, so you can imagine all the money she earned went into buying me whatever I needed. So my art kept improving, and eventually I reached degree level and got a place. I said to my father I like maths. He said, "Why not go for a maths degree?" I said, "You must be joking." He said, "Why not?" I said, "I'm going to be a professional artist and that's it." He said art wouldn't give me a career, and I said, "Yes, I know, but I don't care. My aim wasn't to work, my aim was to be an artist."
Some people were surprised that you went on to university in London, Central St Martin's, a prestigious centre for art. What kind of reactions were there?
I applied to St Martin's thinking I wouldn't get in because it was difficult to get a place. When I received my letter, I was actually the last person to receive the letter from college. I was staggered. I told my father and he got a bit panicky. So I drove straight to college and told my teacher I got the letter. I kept my face deadpan and said I hadn't got in. The teacher believed me and was really upset, but I couldn't keep a straight face. She said, "What are you laughing at?" And I admitted I was lying. I'd got in. The college were really happy because I'd worked so hard. I could hardly believe it. I'd achieved equal standing with hearing people. That had a massive impact on them. It was amazing.
So you were doing fine art at Central St Martin's, then you got drawn into abstract art, didn't you? Why was that? And for those of us who don't really get it, what does abstract art mean?
Just before St Martin's, I had started to create abstract art during my national diploma in Hampshire. The teacher was teaching us how to make canvases, and I decided to make mine 7 feet tall. No one makes them that size, but I wanted mine 7 feet. Next morning the teacher said, "What have you done?" I said, "Well, I want to learn how to do abstract," because I'd been doing a lot of figurative art, portraits with perfect details, landscapes, all perfect representations. That had been my forte, but I wanted to understand abstract. I'd read so much in books. I wanted to find out how to do it. Where do you start? The teacher told me how you could create a story using shapes and colour. I could use oils, so they gave me loads to use. So I started to create something, just covering the canvas with colours randomly. When I finished, the teacher asked what I felt about it, but I didn't know. It was colourful. It was 7 feet big. What more could I say? The teacher said, "Can't you see it?" I said no, I couldn't understand. I knew it looked good, but that was it. So the teacher started to explain. That could be a door leading into a forest. You go through that and you can see the imagination, the dream. Oh yes, I can see it, that's it. And that's how I grasped what abstract art is. There's more freedom of emotional expression, using colours to create my own language, interpreting what it means, the feelings. For me, that's perfect, that's access. I never really learned English at school, never did English literature, so my English language is basic. It's not enough really, but this was a rich language, full of visual meaning, beautiful. I felt free, and I took that much further at St Martin's.
While you were in London, you joined the deaf world. How did that happen? Did you find it easy to fit in?
Okay. When I was growing up, I went to a hearing unit with 5 other deaf who were all oral. Then I went to college and there were no deaf people there, so for the next 5 years I had no contact with any deaf people. I didn't see any deaf friends. Then I went off to London, University, St Martin's, and they told me about another deaf student. I wasn't all that interested, but I thought, that's good. Then I was walking along a corridor. I met this person. She caught my eye and I stopped. I said, hello. She was buzzing and said, I'm deaf. I said, I know, how are you? I hadn't learned to sign at that time. I was very oral. I couldn't lip read her and she was signing very fast. I was overwhelmed. I said, I'm sorry, can you repeat that? I can't hear you. What? Speak up. I can't lip read you. It's not clear. What? It was a terrible clash and we went our separate ways. It was awful. Because my father brought me up trying to help me to hear, to speak clearly. So I didn't realise. I just thought, what's that? What's that? I'd seen people signing on TV, but never really been interested. Then I went to City Lit Deaf Centre. There was always support there. They'd invited students to meet other deaf students. They all seemed to know each other. Then the Asian group drew me into their group. That was exciting because I'd never seen Asian deaf people before. Asian deaf, same as me, first time ever. Because I grew up in a small, very English town, it was a wow moment. These people were like me, Asian. They said, we're going to a pub. Okay, we're not going for a drink, just to meet some friends there. Oh really? Okay. So I went with them and they were chatting and I got the shock of my life. There were thousands and thousands of deaf people all signing. This was real, not on TV, real. I was stunned. Slowly, my attitude started to change. I picked up some signs and became more visual. I learned from them and I realised my attitude had to change. I changed. I absorbed more and more. But then, a few years later, someone told me I wasn't deaf. I didn't belong in the deaf community. I was very upset and I ran out. I couldn't cope. I thought maybe they're right. Maybe I don't belong in the deaf community. I'm only trying to fit in and learn the language. So I ran away. My sister asked why I was so upset. Because I wouldn't go out of the house and that wasn't like me. I said nothing. She said, what's wrong? Nothing. Then I told her. She was furious. She said, who said that? So I said, I'm fine, because I knew if I stayed there depressed, she'd go there, cause a scene. She can be a bit crazy. She'd stand up for me. So I said I was fine and went back. And after a while I realised that person was just ignorant. I kept in touch with one or two of my friends while I was finishing my degree, and then bit by bit went back into the community, but it took a while. I had to be very careful for quite a few years before I had the confidence to sign naturally. A lot of deaf people are still suspicious and think I'm lying because I have a voice. They're right, I do, but that was my parents' choice. Children don't make those decisions when they're born, if they should learn to use sign language or learn to speak. There's no choice. I didn't start to speak till I was 8. Because of my late diagnosis. Then I had speech therapy, which was a huge amount of work. So when my parents came home and I told them I'd been learning to sign, it was a big shock for them. My father just froze and his face went blank. I couldn't understand why. Then I realised, do you think I'm going to lose my voice? Never. I'll always speak with you. I told him not to worry. My signing was for when I was with deaf friends. I'd always use my voice with him.
You've talked about culture, and I know that in Pakistan there's a tradition of arranged marriages. But you decided to ignore that tradition and chose your own husband, a hearing man. How did that happen?
That was a lucky accident. My family usually marry cousins. My parents are actually first cousins. So all the family know each other. But as a young child, I had no interest in marrying my cousin, for goodness sake. But it's a cultural norm that's developed over many years. I just happened to fall in love with someone, and he asked my parents for my hand in marriage. There had been a lot of proposals for me from the age of 16. I always said no, and that caused a lot of arguments between me and my mother. I'd say, what will he do when he comes to England? He can't speak English. Become a taxi driver? Work in a restaurant? How would we communicate? What would we do? That's not what I want for my life. I don't want to be looking after someone. By this time, they'd realised that being deaf hadn't stopped me from doing more. So when my husband came to visit to ask if he could marry me, my father just froze. He wasn't expecting that, because he was used to seeing my friends around the house, male and female. So he assumed this was just another friend. But he wanted to marry me. I thought it shouldn't be a problem, because he was a Muslim. What more do you want? And a doctor. My father froze, but my mother just blew up. She lost it. The arguments went on for the next 3 years, because at the same time my brother had come home with an English girlfriend and they were living together. So that upset my parents, but it was easy to take the blame out on me because my brother lived a long way away. So I was held responsible for my brother. He escaped and I took the rap. So I thought, I'll just wait. They'll give up. I'll wait it out. But it wasn't until 3 years later that my sister said she'd had enough and begged them to let us marry. They were taking a risk with my marriage because they hadn't really met the family on the boys' side. We had just decided to get married and take the risk. So it was a different experience. My parents were actually very brave to take that risk, especially because I was deaf and my father's favourite. So he took a risk. Trust me.
And do you think you made the right decision, marrying a hearing man?
Yes, I knew he was right for me because we'd been together for a year and we waited 3 years altogether. That was important. It showed his commitment. He's not with me because I'm deaf or because I'm British, but because of me. He wanted to marry me. I like his company. I enjoy talking with him. He just happens not to be deaf. I feel our language and communication and the way we think is on the same level, and that's how we aim to keep it in our marriage. We share the same interests and aims in life, so that's perfect.
Now, the organisation ADWA, the Asian Deaf Women's Association, why did you first get involved in that?
Back in 1998, I saw this organisation, the Asian Deaf Women's Association, managed by Asian deaf women. I couldn't really understand the need for it. Why would they need a separate ethnic group? Anyway, I went along and saw what services they had to offer. Went home. Then sometime later they asked if I'd become a trustee, and I agreed because I thought I had something to offer.
You're now chair of the renamed DEWA, the Deaf Ethnic Women's Association. It's got lots of different groups in it, Indian, black, Chinese, some white. How do you manage so many different groups?
The main point of the service is to support deaf ethnic women, regardless of faith or culture, so that we all feel equal. We don't make judgments on whether you're Chinese, Muslim or Indian. They come to us because they're women and they're deaf, and we can offer support. My way is to try and encourage as many deaf Asian people as possible to think that we're all equal. The brilliant thing about the deaf community is that we accept everybody, no matter what faith or culture. We don't have a problem with that. The hearing community seems to be much more divided. Deaf people just integrate and get on with signing with each other. It doesn't matter where you're from or what your faith is. I think hearing people should learn from us. We never see each other as different. The hearing community should take a look at that and see how it can work. We never have political differences. Why do they seem to have to create differences? Where does that come from? Is it a problem with linguistics or translation or visual thinking? Deaf people never think like that. They just treasure having access to the joys of life. That's important.
Now, recently your father passed away. Has that had any significant influence on your art?
Yes, my father died recently, only a few months ago. Since then, I haven't been back to my studio to work. How do I cope with that? I don't know how to deal with the emotions, because art for me is all about my personal journey, my emotions, my expression. At the moment, my emotions are just so raw. I haven't worked out how I can put it on canvas yet. I always seem to be finding a way to escape from the studio at the moment, finding an excuse to do something else. I haven't gone back in yet. The loss of my father is a massive thing for me, massive, and I just don't know how to deal with it yet.
Talking about you now, in terms of your art, what's your ambition now?
My original training was as an artist. My aim was to be an artist, but through my journey I've become an art therapist, a teacher, a mother, a wife. But my aim, and what I started my life with, has always been to become a mainstream artist and to be recognised in the mainstream. Within the deaf community I'm established and recognised, but I haven't achieved that in the hearing mainstream yet.
Is there any particular thing you'd like to achieve in your life that would give you a sense of complete satisfaction?
What would I like to achieve in my life? Well, looking at the big picture out there, it could be difficult to achieve, but it is a dream of mine to get the Turner Prize at the Tate Modern for my art. That would be my ultimate aim. But who knows?